Hello there. When the Palestinian Unity Government was formed a few months ago, there was hope that the fighting on the streets and the infighting in the ranks of power might just be near their end. It appears now that is not the case. The Minister of the Interior, Hani Al-Qawasmi, has resigned, leaving open perhaps the most crucial portfolio, that of security in the territories. And as if to exemplify that, fighting was raging on the streets. 8 are now dead in this latest wave of violence. More now from our Gaza correspondent, Noor Odeh.
In a serious blow to the struggling National Unity Government, Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh accepts the resignation of the Minister of Interior after Hani Al-Qawasmi announced his resignation was final and effective immediately. The surprise resignation came a day after the minister said he would resume his responsibilities and begin implementing the security plan.
I spoke to the president frankly and honestly. I told him I have no interest in the position of the Minister of Interior if it's an empty position that does not include any powers or authorities, exactly the way the Palestinian people wish to have it.
In the National Unity Government, the crisis was apparent.
We cannot accept that Fatah and Hamas are major parts of this government, and at the same time they are fighting in the streets. This must stop. Both Fatah and Hamas hold the responsibility for this situation, and we will have a meeting now in the government, and we want both sides to accept and implement immediately the decisions that will be made. This is the only way to save the future of the Palestinian people. You cannot be in the government and fight with another side at the same time.
The latest development came after Hamas and Fatah agreed to a ceasefire late Sunday, brokered by the Egyptian security delegation in Gaza. The agreement was the first since the signing of the Mecca Agreement and the formation of the National Unity Government. It barely lasted a few hours. Gun battles raged across Gaza on Monday, while Gaza residents remained home, afraid to venture into the lawless streets. Universities closed their doors, and schools sent the few students that made it to their classrooms home. Most prominently, the headquarters of the intelligence services came under fire, and the office of Maher Migdad, a prominent Fatah leader, was attacked and destroyed.
What's happening is the result of a decision from Hamas to attack the Fatah movement and everything not related to Hamas, or anyone who disagrees in opinion with Hamas.
For its part, the Hamas movement laid the blame squarely on Fatah, thereby repeating an exchange of angry rhetoric that had ended with the reconciliatory Mecca Agreement in February.
What happened yesterday and today is not a conflict between Hamas and Fatah. What happened is escalation from Fatah military group and 17 forces which related to Abu Mazen and security agency against Hamas prominent members and against Hamas supporters.
As the day progressed, civilians vacated the streets as the threat of a downward spiral of violence became more apparent. For the residents of Gaza, the slip back into factional violence is another reason for added pessimism. They're now left on their own to defend themselves from increasing threats of Israeli attacks and to take cover from indiscriminate Palestinian bullets that shatter a lot more than their fading sense of personal security. Noor Odeh, Al-Jazeera, Gaza.
In Pakistan, the anger over the suspension of the country's chief judge, Iftikhar Chaudhry, has brought thousands of protesters out onto the streets. This time in Lahore, that was coupled with a general strike across much of the country, which left shops closed and many streets deserted. And the fear within the law fraternity itself is only growing. Earlier, a top court official was shot dead over what his family claims were his links to Chaudhry. Kamal Haider reports from Islamabad.
Hours before proceedings were due to begin, a senior administrator of the country's highest court is gunned down in his home before dawn under mysterious circumstances. The government calls it a simple case of robbery, but the legal community suspects a conspiracy.
The circumstances which is going on throughout the country, which cannot be ignored, in the light of the situation, it might be the target killing.
He was a close aide to Iftikhar Chaudhry, the Supreme Court's suspended Chief Justice, and many in Pakistan say his death is not a coincidence. In another development, the hearing of an appeal from Judge Chaudhry against the suspension stalled on Monday. One judge refused to hear the case. They'll try again at a later date. Iftikhar Chaudhry was due to appear for the 9th time before the Supreme Court. However, those proceedings did not happen today when one of the senior members of that full bench decided not to be a part of it. The acting Chief Justice of the country then had to reconstitute a full bench, and now it will be 13 members. Nearby, a sign of the growing movement in this country, lawyers gathered to listen to a senior opposition politician, Qazi Hussain. They greet his speech with cheers and applause. Many people stayed at home today, heeding a strike call from the opposition after the weekend violence. It claimed more than 40 lives, and as the struggle for Pakistan's heart entered a new phase. In Islamabad, ordinary people continue to bring their civil cases to court, but beneath the surface, the legal community in much of the country is in turmoil. Kamal Haider, Al Jazeera, Islamabad.
Meanwhile, on the border, an attempt to end 2 days of fighting between Pakistani and Afghan troops has led to several deaths. Afghan, Pakistan and US officials were all present at a meeting in a border town in the Kuram region to try to negotiate a truce. Clashes then broke out, leaving several people dead. But as our correspondent in Kandahar, James Bowes, reports, it is unclear how the fighting began and just who was killed.
Now, we've also recently heard from the Afghan Defense Ministry, where a senior official is saying that 2 American soldiers who are part of a delegation who went to the border area to try and solve the problems with the fighting there have been killed. He's saying they were killed by a Pakistani officer. We're trying to seek further clarification on that. I spoke a short time ago to an American military spokesman who said he was aware an incident had taken place, but he was trying to gather all the details.
And a reminder that all this week we're bringing you special coverage from Afghanistan, a look at life for those there and the ongoing battle against the Taliban. Now, 3 weeks ago, James Bowes went to Helmand province in the south to meet with the Taliban. Their spring offensive is now in full swing, so he returned to find out how NATO forces have been progressing. James is the only international correspondent to have spent time with both sides of this battle. This is his report.
This is one of the latest casualties. A British soldier injured in Helmand province. Recent fighting has been intense. There are no exact figures of the casualties on either side. NATO only releases the details of the dead, not those injured. What is clear is that in recent weeks NATO has been pushing forward into areas where the Taliban previously had control. Areas like Guresh district in Helmand. Taliban fighters were there in force when we visited in February.
For 3 days, Al Jazeera have been with Taliban fighters. For much of that time, we've been travelling by road, yet we've seen no Afghan army, no Afghan police and no British soldiers. It's pretty clear to me that large areas of this district are in the control of the Taliban.
3 months on and we're patrolling in the same part of Helmand province with the Afghan National Army, who are here on a joint patrol with British troops serving with NATO. The British know they don't have the resources to keep control here alone. In the long term, much of the work must be done by Afghan forces. Here, they're involved in raiding houses in a village where they suspect some Taliban fighters might be hiding. This area is close to the current front line. The troops are on high alert as they make their way through the village and the surrounding poppy fields.
First of all, we're obviously trying to find Taliban, evidence of Taliban activity, weapons, drugs, anything that is sort of against the ordinary. But on the other side, we're trying to reassure the locals and tell them that we're here to support them, not the other way around. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. We have to go in aggressively because there could effectively be enemy in there, but at the same time reassure the locals that we're not there to hurt them or harm them more.
British commanders paint a positive picture, but the local Afghan government intelligence chief tells us that a large part of Helmand is still controlled by the Taliban.
80% of this province is under control of Taliban. 20% is under government control.
The British know that if they're to extend their reach, Afghan troops must hold the land that's recently been captured. The Afghan unit we filmed seemed professional, but this fledgling army has a patchy reputation. There are problems with desertion and drug addiction. Next to one checkpoint we visited, there were used syringes, although it's not clear who exactly had been injecting heroin here.